Well, kia ora and morena, everybody. Special welcome if you're visiting with us today. My name's Grahame and I am the senior pastor here at Ranui. Malola lei, talofa lava, kirana, whakalofa atu, buenos dias, minglaba, hola, bonjour, ahoy, savos, wanyong, chremoira, and shalom. Now I'm fixed, all right? Well, for a little while anyway. So as 2026 is only a few days away, I thought it would be a good opportunity to preach through the Book of Ruth. Why? Because this book is filled with the love and compassion of God for those who are in dire straits or who are facing big life decisions. I don't know what kind of 2025 you've had, but one of the greatest lessons from the Book of Ruth is that God's love for you endures forever. Now, Ruth is quite a short book at only 85 verses. It tells the story of Ruth, a Moabite widow, her widowed mother-in-law Naomi, and Naomi's relative Boaz. And kindness is an important theme in the Book of Ruth. And Peter Lau, in his commentary on Ruth, says this: the primary purpose of the Book of Ruth was to present God's providence and kindness in preserving the family that produced King David. Or more personally, another scholar says the central of the purpose of the book is this: Naomi's restoration from emptiness to fullness through the selfless acts of loyal love, chesed, by Ruth and Boaz. And as you see, as we read through this book, you'll find this term kinsman redeemer. Now, in the Jewish culture of that day, if a father or husband died, the closest male relative on the father's or husband's side of the family could step in and be what's known as a kinsman redeemer or family redeemer. They could step in and care for that family. That might include marrying the widow if she was childless in order to provide an heir for the family. It could involve buying back land that a poor relative has sold to someone outside of the family in order to survive. It could mean buying the freedom of a relative, for instance, who had been sold into slavery. So let me start with just a little background on this book. So Ruth is one of only 2 books in the Bible named after a woman. The other is Esther. Now, we have no idea who wrote this story of Ruth. No idea of who wrote it down in terms of what we have in the Bible. Some think it might have been the prophet Samuel, but we don't know because the author never self-identifies. It apparently had been handed down orally until it was finally written down, probably during the time of the kings of Israel, maybe around the time of Solomon. A few other introductory comments. Firstly, this concept of hesed is important to understanding the book of Ruth. Unfortunately, it's a Hebrew word that no English word can really convey accurately. Words like faithfulness, goodness, mercy, love, and compassion begin to express this word in English. And I like how this scholar sums it up. He said, hesed refers to an act performed for the benefit of a person in real and desperate need in the context of a deep and enduring commitment between the parties concerned. But we see in the beginning of the book of Ruth, it starts with a tragedy. Let's read. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Euphrates from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Ophrah and the other named Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. A pretty tragic start. And the story starts with a lot of suffering and grief, especially for Naomi. And when suffering comes, you can expend so much energy on trying to get the answer to the question why. And I'm sure she was asking it. Why me and why now? My pastoral advice is that you may never actually know the answer to that question, but you can focus on what you know. You know that God has hesed or love for you. And sometimes you need to reach out with one hand and hang on to God, and you need to reach out with the other hand and hang on to your church family, because that will hold you in place. And the first thing we are told is that in the story is that it's set in the day when the judges ruled in Israel. It might as well started like this. It was a very dark and stormy night. Some have called the Judges the account of the dark ages of the Israelites. It is true that in this part of their history we see the constant ritual abandoning of God. And the heart of what went wrong during this period can be found in a sentence that you read repeatedly in the book, chronicling that time, simply titled the Book of Judges, and this is what it says. In those days, everyone did as he saw fit. 7 times in this book, they abandoned God. 7 times they fell into the hands of other nations. And 7 times God delivered them. And when they came to their senses and when they cried out to him. So why did that keep happening? Why was it so hard for them to settle into their land and keep their heads on straight? I think it's something that everybody can struggle with. They just struggled more famously than most. They're inserted into a culture that was hostile to their faith. Does that sound familiar? Instead of influencing the culture around them, they let the culture influence them. They began to worship the false idols of the Canaanites. They began to accept their morals, their laws, their values, their standards. They were supposed to possess and lay claim to the land, but they allowed the land and its people to possess and lay claim to them. So that was the backdrop for Ruth. Let's just read this first few verses again. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of the 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. So here we have a man, an Israelite, living in Bethlehem, trying to escape the effects of the famine by fleeing to Moab, the neighbouring country. Now here's what's noteworthy. Bethlehem was part of the promised land, the land that God promised to the Jewish people. Now what would have been expected of any faithful Jew would have been not to leave the land like he did, but to wait on God's faithfulness to come through, as it had done so many times before. But he just fled and left behind all his fellow Israelites, the promised land and his God. And to make matters even worse, he went to, of all places, Moab. That's the last place any Jew would have gone, because Moab was the enemy of Israel. It's way back in Deuteronomy it says this: "No Ammonite or Moabite or any of the descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. For they did not come to meet you with bread and water on your way when you came out of Egypt. And they hired Balaam, son of Behor, from Pethor in Aram, Naharaim, pronounce a curse on you. However, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam and turned the curse into a blessing for you because the Lord God loves you. Do not seek a treaty of friendship for them as long as you live. So he's showing no loyalty to his fellow Jews, no loyalty to the promised land, no loyalty to God, and no loyalty to the nation of Israel. And crisis came, and the minute it did, this famine, he abandoned everything he should have clung to. Listen to that part of the story. He abandoned everything he should have hung on to. He turned his back on God and went running to the world. Let's keep reading. Now, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Ophrah and the other Ruth. And they had lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Wow. So we're told that Naomi's husband dies, leaving her a widow with 2 sons. The very thing he was trying to avoid, the opposite happens. And she lost both her sons. And when you hear that, to lose her husband and then both her sons, you can take pity on Naomi. Real pity. Because being a widow in these times was very serious. Even under the best of circumstances, a widow in the ancient Near East culture was often seen as a position of disgrace. For a woman's worth was seen in her husband and through her children. I'm not saying that's right, but that's how it was in those days. Widows were immediately thrown into poverty and subject to abuse, oppression, and exploitation. Many were forced into prostitution. Women in that day lived in a very patriarchal society, one governed by men. And men provided everything, protection and support. And if that's taken away, then a woman would be potentially destitute. This is one of the reasons why you see so many references in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, to protect and care for the widow. Because the ancient Near culture was terribly heartless towards them. So here she was, alone in a foreign land, one that was hostile to Israelites, and suddenly finding herself a widow in the midst. It's hard to imagine a more tragic turn of events for any woman. She is a victim not only of death, but of life. She had nothing, was without hope, and had everything had been taken from her. No home, no husband, no sons. In a foreign land, widowed, with 2 widowed daughter-in-laws. Let's see what happens next. With her 2 daughter-in-laws, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughter-in-laws, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud. And they said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you want to come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this they wept aloud. Then Ophrah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave or to turn my back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, even if death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they arrived in Bethlehem, which is a very small town, by the way, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" So in verse 7, the three women leave the land of the Moabites and head for the land of Judah. It's good to be reminded that travel in ancient times was hard and it was very dangerous, especially for women who are alone. Naomi urges her daughter-in-laws to return home. She's well aware of the difficulties they're going to face if they accompany her to Bethlehem. She wants to spare them any more grief. However, Naomi's urging must have been linked with mixed feelings. If they follow her advice, she will travel completely alone. Then she pronounces a blessing on them, and the word hesed is used in verse 8 in this phrase, "May the Lord show kindness to you." Then she kissed them goodbye and they wept aloud. It's amazing the kind of bond you have with people who journey closely with you through hard times, isn't it? And then when you're reunited, it's a mixture of tears and laughter. No matter how long you've been apart, this remains a very strong bond. And we see this here with Naomi and her daughter-in-laws. Let's keep reading. Would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. So here we see what Naomi thinks about her lot in the world. She blames God. She makes it abundantly clear that, at least in her understanding, the early famine in Bethlehem, the deaths of her husband and sons, and the barrenness of her daughter-in-laws are all evidence that God has forsaken her. He's completely turned against her. And it's hard to see clearly when you're in a storm. And Naomi has been in a protracted storm for some time now and feels that God is out to get her. And she feels that he's not close, he's far away. When I was a hospital chaplain, Christian patients often felt the same. They'd say to me, "Grahame, God doesn't feel close anymore. I call out to him and he doesn't call back. I find it almost impossible to pray and to read the Bible." And my counsel was often that, you know what, God can use anybody to help you. The next day I visited her and she told me that one of the cleaners who had witnessed her despair had offered to pray for her. It made a huge difference. It didn't take away the suffering, she said, but at least I knew God hadn't forgotten me. God hadn't forgotten me. Let's read from Ruth 1, 16 to 17. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, even if death separates you and me." This is an amazing twist in the story. Ruth's actions are very heroic. The original Hebrew uses the word abandon to illustrate her commitment to leave her Moabite family permanently, and the word cling to describe her attachment to Naomi. And then she declares an oath. "Only death will separate me from you." She is saying that her love for Naomi transcends the bonds of her Moabite origin and her national religion. She's giving up everything for her. And with such a speech, Naomi realizes that Ruth is determined to go with her, so she stops urging her to leave and go back to Moab. Once a woman makes up their mind, guys, you know what I mean? This is a scholar commenting on this. It's easy to underestimate how unlikely Ruth's response was in the ancient context, a world where women typically sought fulfillment through marriage and childbirth. But in the end, Naomi is quite wrong. By staying with Naomi, eventually Ruth's story ends well. However, at the moment, this is beyond either of the woman's wildest dreams. Naomi heads home believing that God's abandoned her, and yet her blessing on her life is just around the corner. She can't see around the corner, but God's blessing is coming. God's blessing is coming. He's moving her back to Bethlehem to bring blessing into her life once again. And we shouldn't be too hard on Naomi. After all, she's gone through these awful experiences of bearing her husband and both her sons in a foreign land. And understandably, she ends up with no hope for her future. God, in His sovereignty, is already guiding her to a place to receive His grace. And I think one of the things we must always remember is that we can voice our pain to God and He will hear us. However, for Naomi, her pain, her anxiety has completely overwhelmed her. Self-absorption in the midst of pain and affliction is very understandable. Yet it always blinds a person from God's greater plan and the small ways in which God may be working His plan out, even if that means a cleaner in a hospital comes alongside you to pray for you. However, the tremendous pain and affliction these trials bring is real and sometimes impossible humanly to handle. I remember when I was in the police as a young cop, I went with my sergeant one night to visit with a family who had been informed that their son had died in a road accident. And we needed someone to come and officially identify the body. This is, without a doubt, the worst job you will ever have if you're in the police. His mother answered the door and immediately looked at my sergeant and said, "Which one of you is a Christian?" My sergeant was a bit taken back. Not the question you'd be expecting. He says, "Well, Grahame is." Isn't that nice? Dropped me right in it. Just have to say, he is. "Good," she said. "I prayed that a Christian would come so we could pray together." Amazing, eh? I had the privilege of sitting on a couch and praying with her and making my sergeant very uncomfortable. Wasn't a lot of talk in the car on the way back. And here, I'm forced to agree with this scholar who says this. Sometimes disasters come, and the suffering that takes place is not the result of God's punishment of sin in the life of the believer. Sometimes it comes in order that God may glorify Himself through the believer's life. However, the doctrine of God's sovereignty is not especially comforting for Naomi. While God allows emptiness to come to her, He does it in order that He can fill her afresh with His hesed. She will receive a blessing that she does not expect, and her suffering comes in order that God may be glorified in and through her life. The fact that Jesus became one of us and suffered means He knows exactly what we go through. It may not change our suffering, but it does dignify it. Sometimes, I'll admit, I get frustrated that God's timetable doesn't suit mine. And I'm always reminded of one of the fruits of the Spirit is patience. If you find yourself struggling, we have a prayer chain here at Ranui. And all you must do is make contact, and a cascade of prayers will be offered in your name, and I want to tell you they will make a difference. They will make a difference. As Naomi returned home, maybe there are some here today that need to return home, spiritually speaking, that is. Maybe it's time for you to return to God and His church. Being nestled with fellow believers is one of the keys to Christian life. Maybe God is saying to you, come back to me. So we finish this part of the story with these women completely alone. Women who are victims of their husband's willful disregard for God, particularly Naomi. She's an elderly Jewish widow living in Moab with no prospects and no one to care for her. She's not only the victim of death, but the victim of life. She has nothing, and is without hope. Everything of value and worth has been taken for her. So the stage is set for the story to continue and the drama to unfold. When we think of these women, we ask questions. Will they find a way to survive, or will they be exploited? Will they stay together, or will they separate? Where is Naomi's faith in all of this? What kind of person is she going to turn out to be? And what is up with Ruth so far, who hasn't been mentioned much? Pastor Ty's on preaching next week, but after that we're going to continue with this amazing story of Ruth and Naomi. So as the worship team comes, let me pray. Lord, sometimes difficulty and challenge, exactly like what is in front of Naomi and Ruth, brings us back to you. For those this morning who need to come back, Lord, I pray that they will hear your voice. Come back to me. Come back to me. I love you. I have hesed for you. And I pray, Lord, your grace and your blessing on their lives. Amen.